Ahoy, mateys! How are you all doing out there? Good to see ya. Welcome to our Great Lakes cruise with the Homes at Homes. My name is Elliot Nelson. I'm the first mate on this here freighter behind me, where we're gonna cruise the Great Lakes ships today. I'm the first mate, but my captain's here too. Hey there, Captain.
Greetings, First Mate. My name is Captain Megan, and I serve as a Sea Grant Extension educator in the Saginaw Bay region of Michigan. But today I'm here aboard a freighter where we'll be journeying across the Great Lakes Basin, exploring different ports and how our Great Lakes are connected to all the maritime industries that surround them. But before we begin, we're going to introduce our homes. So as we've learned in past weeks, our HOMES is a helpful acronym to remember our Great Lakes. And we're going to shout out at home what our HOMES are. So we're going to just reintroduce the acronym again. So over here, we have our first lake, begins with the letter H. It's Huron. And next, we go to our next lake in HOMES, the letter O. Any guesses? Ontario. And then we head over here, the M. Any guesses? Michigan. And then over here, the lake that starts with an E, it's Erie. And then we also have the lake up here. It's the largest of the Great Lakes, Lake Superior. So these make our homes, which serve as the largest surface freshwater system on this planet and provides our region with 20% of the world's surface freshwater. And here's our vessel. First Mate, will you introduce them to it?
Sure, Captain. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to get out on the lakes with you this morning. So we're going to be sailing in this brand new freighter, actually. This freighter's still being built for the Inland Seas Steamship Company, and they are building one of the newest freighters in the last 30 years built for the Great Lakes. This one's 640 feet long. It has a self-loading crane, and we're going to be taking this valuable cargo across the Great Lakes, starting out in the Atlantic Ocean, though, where we bring our cargo in from.
Yep. And so here, this vessel is going in from the ocean, and we're going to go down the St. Lawrence Seaway, and it's a 1,200-mile journey from the Atlantic Ocean to Lake Ontario. And before we get to this freshwater system, we're going to disinfect our ballast water to make sure we're not spreading invasive species. And here, as we pass through the St. Lawrence Seaway, we went through 7 different locks. We'll learn more about locks over the course of our Great Lakes cruise, but these locks help us lift and lower ships so we can go through the Great Lakes Basin, because there are different levels of elevation throughout. So we went through 7 locks to get here, and our vessel went up and down 225 feet to get from the ocean to the Great Lakes.
Wow, that was a fast journey there, Captain. But let's keep going. We've got cargo to move. We've got cargo to land. All sailing. There we go. Hey, look, we've made it to Toronto. That's a beautiful port. I love Toronto and the Canadians there. I think I might hop out real quick for some poutine. Toronto is one of the largest cities in all of Ontario, or the largest city in Ontario, one of the largest in all of Canada. 2/3 of Canada's steel comes through this port. Just incredible every year. It's a great place. And hey, we just sailed across Lake Ontario. Let's give a shout out to Lake Ontario. It might be the smallest lake by surface area, but it's got quite a bit of water because look how deep it is, 802 feet deep. I'm sure glad we didn't fall off board. That'd be a long way down to the bottom. Well, I'm glad we got to make it through Lake Ontario and visit Toronto. I think, Captain, we got to keep going. We got cargo to move.
We do. Where's our next stop? Well, we have to get to Lake Erie. But to get to Lake Erie, we have to get past Niagara Falls.
Oh, no.
So you can see here, these are Niagara Falls. And just a shout out to a former local resident to my town in Bay City, here is Annie Edson Taylor. She was a former charm school teacher in the 1900s, and she's the first person to ever go over Niagara Falls in a barrel. She did this back in 1901. but don't try that at home. So here you can see we're here at the Niagara Falls, and we have to go up a lot to get to our next Great Lakes. With engineering and the Welland Canal, we're able to do that and continue our journey through the Great Lakes.
Whew. I'm sure glad we didn't have to try to climb up them Niagara Falls. All right, well, let's keep sailing. Sailing, sailing across Lake Erie. Hey, we're in Cleveland. Cleveland, what a great city. Look at that beautiful waterfront. I took that picture of the amazing Cleveland waterfront. Cleveland rocks, you know? It was one of the first cities lit up by electricity, and it's home of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's home of one of those great old sitcoms that goes, Cleveland rocks, in the theme song. I love Cleveland. And hey, let's not forget about the lake we just went across, Lake Erie. What an amazing lake. Lake Erie might be the most shallow lake at only a few hundred feet deep at its deepest point. Most of the time it's less than 60 feet deep. But, you know, it's a great lake. It's the most productive lake of all the Great Lakes. It's got the most fish in it. Man, I really loved our time on Lake Erie. But hey, let's keep going. We've got cargo to move. Up we go. So let's move up into the Detroit River. And now we're getting by Detroit. Whoa, hey, is that Mary? It's Mary on shore.
Hey, Megan. Hey, Elliot, glad you can see me. I'm here under the Ambassador Bridge. What a cool time for you guys to be coming by. Thanks to the Ambassador Bridge and the Detroit Windsor Tunnel, a railroad tunnel, and freighters like the one you're on, there's a ton of cargo that comes through this area. So we're so glad to have you. And the Detroit River is actually home to the only U.S. Postal Service mail boat with its own zip code, and that's the J.W. Westcott 48222. And soon we'll even have a downtown beach that's built by the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy. So, all right, glad you could visit. See you next time. Have a great trip.
Bye, Mary. So good to see you.
Thanks, Mary. So we're going to continue on our journey. We're going to pass through Lake St. Clair. We're going to pass by my town in Bay City here in Saginaw Bay, and we're going to head up to Alpena. I used to live in Alpena, and it's known as the Sanctuary of the Great Lakes. It's home to Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, a freshwater national marine sanctuary that protects and preserves shipwrecks in Lake Huron. They estimate that there are over 200 shipwrecks found in the 4,300 square mile protected area, but they've only been able to find about 99 of them. So maritime archaeologists serve as detectives trying to find our history and connection to maritime industries of the past. It's also home to nearby Rogers City, which has the largest limestone quarry in the world. And we use limestone as we transport on our freighters across the Great Lakes. So here we are, we're on Lake Huron, but you can see we're also connected to Lake Michigan, because Lake Huron and Lake Michigan are technically one lake. And we're going to continue our journey from Alpena, and we're going to go up to the Straits of Mackinac, where we will check out the Mighty Mac. The Mackinac Bridge was completed in 1957, and it helps connect Michigan's Upper Peninsula with the Lower Peninsula. Before the Mackinac Bridge, people had to take ferries to go from the Lower Peninsula to the UP. That would be a long journey to visit my first mate, Elliot. And on the bridge, you can see that they have lots of fun parades, from Mini Cooper parades to historic tractor parades. Definitely something fun to check out in the summer. And on Labor Day, you can even walk across the bridge. Very cool. But we're going to continue on our journey, and we're going to go check out Lake Michigan.
That's right. Let's sail across Lake Michigan, and let's wave to the sandy shores along the bay. Oh, there was the great Sleeping Bear Dunes, the tallest dunes in all the Great Lakes, and some of the tallest in the world. But we got to keep going, and now we're at Chicago, the city by the lake, home of 2 baseball teams and hot dogs and all sorts of great stuff. I wish we could get out here and go visit Navy Pier or the amazing Shedd Aquarium. There's so many cool things, but we've got cargo to unload. In fact, 26 million tons of cargo and natural resources get unloaded at the Port of Chicago every year. It's the largest city in the Great Lakes, and it's the largest port that ships more goods than any other place across the Great Lakes. It's really the heart of America, where goods get out to all across the Midwest. It's an amazing port, and I'm glad we got to stop here, but we can't stop for long because we've got more cargo. Let's go. Brrr, sail away. Now we're going to go back across Lake Michigan. Again, that nice productive lake that's got some shallow parts, it's got some deep parts, and it's still got quite a bit of salmon to go out and fish. I actually cast a fishing pole as we were going. But now we're getting through the St. Mary's River. Such a cool system here. And look, there's the Soo Locks. It's Sault Ste. Marie. I think I see my house from here. I live really close to Sault Ste. Marie, and there's my office right up there at Lake Superior State University. I love Sault Ste. Marie. It's an awesome city. You gotta visit it if you haven't been there. It has locks in it that over 7,000 of these freighters come through every single year. 7,000 passings. And you know what? If you've got a kayak or wreck boat, you can even go through locks on the Canadian side. I've done it in my kayak. It's really fun when you go through these locks, which are really like boat elevators. As that graphic shows, we have to go up again to get to Lake Superior. So we have to go up about 22 feet. And now that we're through the elevator, we're into Lake Superior. Let's hope we don't end up like the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to continue on our journey to our final port, Duluth, where this is our westernmost port in our Great Lakes journey. And this is 2,300 miles from the Atlantic Ocean, which was the start of our cruise. And Lake Superior is the special lake because you can fit all of the other 4 lakes in Lake Superior because it contains that much water, which is really neat. And like Elliot said, this is also where the Edmund Fitzgerald went down near Whitefish Bay. So something important to remember too when thinking about our maritime history. So here we have Lake Superior. The deepest depth is over 1,000 feet. And we hope you enjoyed our Great Lakes cruise where we went on a Great Lakes cruise journey on our freighter and visited lots of different ports. If you liked learning about this freighter and the different ports we visited, you can also learn more about other Great Lakes freighters by visiting boatnerd.com. And there's also an interactive map where you can check out other freighters on the Great Lakes. So as we learned today, we were just one vessel moving across the Great Lakes, but here on this map you can see that there are a lot of vessels moving around. And here where I live in Bay City, I actually like to watch the freighters go up and down the Saginaw River, bringing in goods to our different factories and manufacturing businesses in the area. And if you enjoyed learning about the Great Lakes, you can learn other fast, fun facts on our Michigan Sea Grant website. We have individual profile pages for each lake where you can do more of a deep dive. And with that, we're ready for 20 questions in 20 minutes. And to help us with that, we have our colleague Geneva Langland from the University of Michigan and Michigan Sea Grant.
Thank you so much, Megan. So we're going to change up the format a little bit today. Instead of taking questions right now, we're going to go back over some of the awesome questions that you all asked us on different episodes in Homes at Homes, but we didn't have time to answer right then. So we're going to do this rapid fire. We're going to zoom through these questions. We might go a little bit over 11 o'clock, but if you have to jump off the call for another appointment, you can always catch up at the end of the Q&A session when we put this up on YouTube very soon. So let's dive into our questions here. Our first question goes back to our bird episode. Why are male birds brighter in color than female birds?
That's such a great question. I think I'll take that one. So as you can see here, we've got the northern cardinal and the male and the female. The male's a bright red and the female's that dull brown. How do you think the females might be a little more brownish, like kind of like twigs and grass looks? Maybe it's because they sit on the nest and feed the young a lot more, and so their dark brown color helps them blend in to protect the young, while the males are more flashy. If you look at the next picture of these hawks called northern harriers, you see the same thing because these are ground nesting hawks and the female stays on the nest while the male has to be flashy and attract the mate. Their flashy colors tell that mate that they're good at surviving even though they're flashy and bright, and so they'll make a good mate. And the females have to be dark colored to blend in and protect the young. Now that's not the case for all species though. You can see these eagles, great egrets, chickadees, they're actually identical between the males and the females for most parts. But there are already a few weird species, like this very rare in Michigan, common in Alaska, the red phalarope. And that bright one on the right is actually a female, and the duller one on the left is the male. And that's because the female lays the eggs and then heads out of there, heads south, so that the male can take care of the young. And that's why the male is more camouflaged in this species. All right.
Wow, Elliot, thank you so much. Sticking with our bird theme, let's go back and remember what are some of the biggest and the smallest birds here in Michigan.
Man, I hope you're out birding right now, because there are so many cool things you can see right in your own backyard. And if you look up, you might get lucky and see the migrating trumpeter swan, which is the largest bird in all of Michigan and one of the largest North American birds, and one of the largest waterfall, heaviest waterfall in the world. This bird can be over 22 pounds. There's not many birds that weigh that much. They have a 10-foot plus long wingspan, and they're over 5.5 feet long. And a lot of restoration work has gone into Seney National Wildlife Refuge and many places in Michigan to bring these back, which were actually extinct in Michigan by the 1960s. And now they're actually back in good numbers. The smallest bird, on the other hand, is a lot different. It's the hummingbird. The ruby-throated hummingbird is the one species of hummingbird we have in Michigan. It's 2.5 to 3.5 inches long, 3 to 4 inch wingspan, and 0.0088 pounds. That's a tiny bird. You can see it's nesting in a rose bush there between two little twigs, and that's all it needs to lay its nest, because it's tiny.
Wow, those are some amazing. Now we're going to go on to our next episode where we learned about plastic and plastic pollution in the Great Lakes. Megan, how does plastic impact wildlife?
Well, plastic can impact wildlife in a lot of different ways. First, there are issues with plastic entanglement. So different creatures can get caught up in marine debris, which is any human-made items that can end up in our waterways, and it can make it difficult for them to move or eat. If you're wondering what this might feel like, you can put a rubber band on your thumb and on your pinky, and it can show you what it's like to be trapped in marine debris. Try to get out of the rubber band with only using your one hand. It's harder than you think. And plastic can also be dangerous because when plastic gets in the water, it can photodegrade, meaning with light and heat from the sun, it breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. And those small pieces in the water can absorb toxins. And then plankton and smaller fish and then bigger fish can eventually eat those plastics. And then if you eat fish, you could potentially eat plastic. Scientists are still researching what kind of impact plastic has on wildlife and on humans. So it's something to think about, but it highlights why it's really important to refuse to single use.
So you just told us that plastic can break down into itty-bitty pieces, but how tiny can those plastic bits get?
They can get to be pretty small. So microplastics are less than 5 millimeters in length. And there are different kinds of microplastics. So there are primary microplastics, which can include microbeads or nurdles, which are the plastic pellets that you can melt to make bigger plastic pieces. And then there's also the secondary microplastics. So thinking about how plastics in the water can break down into smaller and smaller pieces, that's another source. And you can also get plastic from your washing your clothes. So clothing made out of synthetic materials like polyester and rayon can actually shed microfibers when you wash them. And those fibers are so small, they can't get filtered by water treatment plants and end up in our Great Lakes. There's an even smaller kind of plastic, which is known as the nanoplastic. And those are less than 100 nanometers in size. And 1 nanometer, just for perspective, equals 1 billionth of a meter. So needless to say, nanoplastics are very tiny.
That is so itty-bitty. Speaking of things that are itty-bitty, let's talk about fish. What is the smallest fish in the Great Lakes? And while we're at it, what's the smallest fish in the world?
So the smallest fish in the Great Lakes, there's a few very, very tiny fish we have out there. People commonly call them minnows, although they're actually not all in the minnow family. The rainbow darter is only 2 to 3 inches long as an adult, and it's super bright colored and beautiful and amazing. It's in southern Michigan. The brook stickleback can be found in a little bit bigger bodies of water, and they are around 2 inches at their largest. So they're a tiny one. And check out the Michigan Sea Grant article, When is a Minnow Not Really a Minnow, to learn more about tiny fish in the Great Lakes. But the smallest fish in the world is even smaller. In fact, that fish is only 7.9 millimeters. Look at that right there. That's an adult fish on that guy's finger. We only discovered this a few years ago. That's why science is so important, to keep getting out there and discovering what's new. These are native to Indonesia, and they're tiny, and their name is complicated. That's the Latin name. They don't actually have a common name because they were just discovered.
That's a pretty amazing tiny fish. So if I've got a fish, whatever size it might be, at home or in my classroom, and either it dies, I'm very sad, or I can't keep it anymore, should I flush it down the toilet?
No! 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 Never flush your fish down the toilet. First off, you might just end up with a backed up toilet and water all over the place, and that would not be fun. But secondly, if that fish happens to have gotten a virus or a sickness and you flush it down, it ends up in our sewer system, where they actually are open air most of the time, and they do get clean, but that virus can still spread to the other fish that live there, and then it eventually goes out to a water body. Also, if that fish just happened to not be alive, it could stay alive, and it could survive just fine in water and could end up becoming an invasive species. Even goldfish can become an invasive species in some ponds and lakes. So never flush your fish. Go to the michigan.gov/invasive to learn how to get rid of your fish if you have them. If they're dead, you can just throw them into your regular trash or compost them. They make great compost. So.
All right, now we know. So let's move on to the Great Lakes, Great Films, Great Writers episode, where we learned a little bit more about shipwrecks. Megan, does being underwater damage a shipwreck?
So, Geneva, it depends. I checked with my friend Stephanie Ganduya, who's a maritime archaeologist for Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And in saltwater environments, saltwater can corrode metal. And marine creatures like teredo worms can actually eat wood. Luckily, in the Great Lakes, we are salt and teredo worm free. So our shipwrecks are actually very well preserved here in the Great Lakes. And you can check out some of the 6,000 shipwrecks that are found in the Great Lakes by visiting them by diving or snorkeling or kayaking over. And at Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, they're very well preserved. Here you can see is the wreck of the Northwestern. And they've even made cool 3D models for you to be able to explore the shipwreck from home. So definitely a cool resource to check out. And by being in these fresh, cool waters, these ships are really well preserved, and something that we should keep in the lake, and you should never take any part of a shipwreck home with you. It should always stay there, and you should just use your eyes, and if you are scuba diving, you only want to leave bubbles behind.
Megan, have you been lucky enough to go leave bubbles at a shipwreck before?
I have. So I have both snorkeled and scuba dived on different shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. And up near Alpena is actually where I got certified to scuba dive. And it's a lot of fun and a great way to go out and spend time with friends. And you always want to have a dive buddy with you. So here I'm with friends exploring the Duncan City, which is a shallow wreck in Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, but with a group of friends on the Big 5 dive. We also visited all 5 Great Lakes in less than 24 hours, and on 4 of the 5 Great Lakes, we visited shipwrecks. So this is a fun challenge you could do with friends, is trying to visit and explore different shipwrecks across the Great Lakes. But you don't have to always do it in 24 hours.
That sounds like an amazing adventure. Now we're going to go on to our lake effects episode, where we learned about weather and climate and wind. Elliot, what is the highest wind speed recorded on the Great Lakes?
Well, Geneva, it can get very, very windy. We can get windy days that get sustained winds of over 50, 60 miles an hour. It's hard to say exactly what the highest wind exactly at any one point was, but a really high wind day was the day of the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, one of the windiest days on record, where a gust of 90 miles per hour was recorded by another ship on the day of the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And so we can see up to 90-mile-an-hour gusts on the Great Lakes. And this doesn't even take into account things like tornadoes, where it probably gets even higher wind speeds into the hundreds. So we can get very, very windy days.
Certainly can. Now we're going to move on to our episode where we learned about lake sturgeon, that amazing dinosaur fish. And we were wondering, how do lake sturgeon sleep? But that made us wonder, how do any fish sleep?
Which is a great question, and we didn't know the answer the day of. And come to find out, scientists still don't really know the answer to this question. This is just another great example of why science is important, because there's so many things we still have to learn. So the lake sturgeon does rest, though. Scientists have discovered that fish don't necessarily sleep like we do, where they totally shut down in a lot of ways, but they do rest. You can find maybe even your own betta fish or goldfish resting at the bottom of your tank at nighttime sometime, moving a lot less. They slow their metabolisms down. They typically find a place to hide, like in the sand. Lake sturgeon are so big, they're often pretty safe. So they probably find a nice, fast-flowing area of the river to rest. But sturgeon and all fish have to keep moving water across their gills. So if they happen to be in a still water area, then they might rest by just slowly circling in an area or flapping their gills back and forth, even though they're asleep. So fish don't really sleep in the same way we do, but they do rest, and they have to make sure they're still moving water across their gills when they do it.
Sleep swimming still counts as sleep. Here's another question from that episode. Do lake sturgeon come up to the surface for air?
Another great question with no real solid answer out there, but a research team from Florida that researched the Gulf sturgeon, which has similar habits of jumping out of the water and splashing. Our lake sturgeon are known to do the same thing, and that people have always wondered why. Why does this bottom-dwelling fish leap out of the water? Well, that research team found that that slap they make on the water is almost like a very specific signal, that every time that slap is the same noise. So it's really more like saying, hey friends, what's that going on? So the lake sturgeon slap can be heard dozens and dozens of miles away, and they think they use it for communications. Other hypotheses, which are educated guesses or testable questions that are out there, are that they use it to fill up their swim bladders with air to regulate where they are in the water, or my friend Mary told me that they've actually been seen to do this to try to shake off sea lamprey, possibly, that are attached to them.
Speaking of Mary, we're going to go back to the episode you did about frogs and toads. Can you tell us how many years toads can live out in the wild?
Yeah, the American toad can actually only live about 2 years in the wild on average, but some of them get to be about 10 or 15 years old. And so you might think, how do we even know how old they are? Well, if one of them dies, a scientist can actually take a look at the annual growth rings that are on the bones of the toad toes. Can you believe that?
So basically, it's like using tree rings to tell how old a tree is, but for a toad. That's amazing.
Exactly.
All right. Now we're going to go fast forward to the episode that Todd Marcy did, where he showed us his painting techniques. Todd, can you tell us who are some of your favorite artists?
There are so many talented artists that I admire, but two of my favorites. One is Maxine Masterfield. She's a contemporary artist, and contemporary artist means it's a artist who's currently painting. I learned from two of her books. One was called The Painting, the Spirit of Nature, and In Harmony with Nature. She taught me to make observations when out in nature and to try to mimic or copy nature's own techniques using materials that are around your house. Another artist named Andy Goldsworthy. He's a modern day English sculptor and photographer who also mimics nature, as you can see from the photos. Yeah, those are my two favorites.
And speaking of favorites, do you have some favorite pieces of art that you've made before?
I'm not sure I can just boil it down to one favorite. However, I can show you a few that come to mind. One of my favorite watercolors is this long and narrow landscape painting up at the top called Earth. And it was inspired by the Rocky Mountains. And I later modified that format or that style when I was hiking along the Great Lakes or taking a boat cruise along the Great Lakes, especially Pictured Rocks, National Lakeshore. But I use a long, narrow format because of the view. Imagine yourself up at the top of a mountain looking at this beautiful vista, or out on a boat looking at this endless shoreline of the Great Lakes. On the next slide, some of my other favorites are Ginkgo Sanctuary and a very tall painting next to it, which is taller than me, called Paving Rivers.
Must have taken a lot of paint to make that big one. And now we're going to go on to the episode where we learned about invasive species that have set up camp here in the Great Lakes. What is the ittiest little invasive species here in the Great Lakes?
I checked with Rochelle Sturdivant, who manages the GLANCES database, which tracks non-Indigenous species in the Great Lakes and is managed by our NOAA partners with the Great Lakes Environmental Research Lab. And she said that the smallest invasive species in the Great Lakes are actually viruses. So I wasn't able to get photos of the viruses themselves, but here are photos of the impacts of the different viruses. So the viruses themselves are measured in nanometers, and you can see that they can have a big impact on our fishery. So it's really important to make sure, if you are out fishing, to clean your gear when moving from one watershed to another to stop the spread of invasive species, including small things like viruses.
Very good call. And how about on the other end of the spectrum, the biggest invaders in the Great Lakes?
I checked with Rochelle for this question too, and she said the golden willow is the biggest invasive species in the Great Lakes. And this tree can grow to be 30 meters at full height. And it can have really invasive root systems.
Wow, who knew? Now we're going to go on to the awesome episode where we learned about mud puppies. And we wondered, how much do mud puppies eat per day?
Well, that's a trick question because mud puppies don't even eat every day. So do you remember mud puppies from our episode last week? Look at this cute little fella. They have very slow metabolisms, so they don't need to eat every day. They eat maybe about once or twice a week, actually. And when they do eat, they're only eating about 2 to 3 earthworms or small fish at a time.
And when they're eating those earthworms and fish, do they use teeth?
Yes. Actually, mud puppies use rows of teeth that they bring their prey into their mouth and eat that way. They have 3 different sets of teeth located in different parts of their mouths. And even though all the teeth are pretty much the same, scientists gave them each their own unique name.
So spiky. Wow. And Mary, another question for you. Since you did our episode about turtles, if I am outside in the woods or by a pond and I find a cool turtle, do I get to keep it as a pet?
No, absolutely not. Turtles like this map turtle have everything they need out in their natural environment. They may look cute, but it takes a lot of work to keep turtles as pets, and they can develop parasites and diseases. So you shouldn't release a pet turtle into the wild either. Instead, take it back to the pet shop where you purchased it so they can rehome it.
Great advice. And when we learned about turtles, we learned that they eat fungus. What's fungus?
That's right. My friend Kenzie had this question and it just makes me laugh. Turtles like this box turtle actually eat a variety of foods, including fungus. So Kenzie asks, what is a fungus? Fungus belongs to a group of organisms that produce spores, and those include molds, yeast, and mushrooms, just like the one you see here in the middle photo. Turtles can even eat mushrooms that are poisonous to humans.
Wow, that is pretty cool. So if you get some mushrooms on your pizza, maybe there's a turtle who wishes those mushrooms were on his plate instead.
That's right.
Well, everyone, I just have to say thank you. And as a quick reminder, we have challenges at the end of each of our Homes at Home series. And if you have done 5 of the challenges, we will send you a Great Lakes Junior Scientist certificate. And if you want, optional, we will list your name on our Great Lakes Hall of Heroes at the Homes at Homes website. If you missed any of our previous episodes, that website's listed right down there at the bottom, or just go to michiganseagrant.org. You'll see it right at the start of the page. But for all of us at the Homes at Homes team, we just have to say from the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for tuning in to our series here. We just know that the Great Lakes are 20% of the world's surface fresh water and one of the most important resources in the entire world when it comes to fresh water. And so it's so critical that folks like you learn about the Great Lakes and become Great Lakes stewards. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to learn with us and to help steward and foster our Great Lakes resources. Have a great day, and maybe we'll see you in 2021 for some more Homes and Homes. Bye.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye.